I'm going to read a bit from my new book, The Bardic Monk. There are monks throughout this book, and this is a part of the story where the young monk, Alain d'Armand, is helping the old monk, Caradog, who eventually became Saint Caradog, back to his home in a cave in Ishmael in West Wales. When they arrive, the neighbour tells the young monk all the tragedies that have befallen whilst the old monk hasn't been there. Caradog hears this story, Caradog the old monk hears this story and wants to know what's going on. Caradog called my name and asked what was being said. Perhaps he had heard, but I repeated it for him, and when I tried to explain Berwyn's problems, he told me to bring the man himself in. Berwyn repeated all he had told me. Caradog lifted himself and spoke in a voice which I dared not disobey, asking us to carry him outside on his litter and to put him down on the burned land. By now it was dusk, and the air was chill with a heavy damp mist. I was not happy to be moving him at such a time, and began to say so, but he smiled and made no reply, knowing I must do it. We struggled, for I am, as I have told, very short in height, and Berwyn was twice my stature, being a lofty and broad individual, a build which suited his calling to farm and work the land. We were aware that at any moment the tilt of the pallet could send Caradog rolling into the dirt, but somehow groping and stumbling we managed to take him as far as instructed. Into the plot of stubble which had been the giver of Berwyn's livelihood in better times we went, and there on Caradog's word we laid down the pallet, and after raising him with cushions we stood back. Brother Caradog prayed aloud, and we followed him with our Amen from time to time. These were prayers I did not know, and I could see the same was true of Berwyn, but the sound of them calmed everything. The tilting stumble across the field was forgotten. The air charged with the same atmosphere that I have known creep sometimes into a service in the church, an upliftment in sharing. When the prayers ended and his voice finally stopped, Caradog raised a hand to Berwyn, saying, "The Lord hearkens to us. Make good my prayers by adding yours this night. But first, bring me a bowl of water." Berwyn headed across the field to his well and returned carrying a bowl of water as instructed. By now it was full dark, with cloud cover hiding the moon and the stars, and I had begun to grow anxious at the prospect of returning Caradog on the pallet to the cave. I mentioned that we should waste no time in returning, and that there was a strong possibility that due to the lack of light we may find ourselves stumbling in a more dangerous fashion than we had done previously. But Caradog was unmoved, calm and unhurried, and he took the bowl of water in his hand and spoke a blessing in Latin over it. As I watched, shivering and wishing to be inside under cover, my eyes, straining in the dark, followed the outline of Caradog's movement as he flung the water around him onto the ground. When the water droplets fell, I began to be aware that light was filtering into the shadowy darkness, and we were being joined by fireflies. At first one or two, then a few more, and then many, many more. The scene was lit, as if by some holy intervention to throw light into our darkness. They swarmed around us, hundreds of them, most like they were attracted by the glimmer of the water, But it was such a strange and wild experience. It suggested a deeper significance. I was young and had never seen its like, and I looked to Berwin, who stood with his mouth wide in astonishment. Caradog showed less surprise, but he looked about and smiled as the mass of tiny flickering lights danced and fluttered about us. It was as though they illuminated us for their own pleasure, for each of us was lit, our faces as bright as though in clear candlelight, and we smiled for the joy of it as they twirled and spun around us, whilst beyond their charmed circle everything was as dark as before. In that place, and for the first time in my life, a sense of holy presence came to me.